Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webcast. Today, we will discuss how to capture rich customer data and engage customers in more relevant ways. But first, let me introduce our speaker. Thanks to Wendy Chen at OmniStream, we are very excited to have Michael Gethen, who has worked at the forefront of industry, market, and technology knowledge in the evolving media and tech space. He has worked for media companies, technology companies, investment banks, and from startups to major listed companies. In early 2011, Michael co-founded Sprooki. They're headquartered in Singapore, and we were fortunate enough to have them last year at our Fung retailing conference. Sprooki focuses on licensing its proprietary technology platform to help retailers, malls, and consumer brands acquire and retain consumers via smartphone apps that are custom branded for the client. With that, I'll let Michael take it away.
Thanks, Deborah, and hello everyone, and welcome to the webcast today. And thank you so much for dialing in or joining us. What I'm going to do is talk to you for about the next 20 minutes or so, give you some content about this subject area that I spend my day in every day, steeped in. What I hope to do is demystify a lot of the buzzwords and the high-tech stuff that you hear about, and then at the end of that presentation, then open up the floor, so to speak, for questions, and happy to take your questions and answer them. I guess just to set the scene in terms of what we're going to talk about today, we're really going to split this issue of the chase, or if you like, the holy grail of retail, which is customer engagement and customer data, into a couple of different parts and break them down and help you understand them a little better. I'm taking a fairly, if you like, simple approach, not knowing who's in the audience in terms of level of experience and knowledge. Some of you may be very sophisticated and experienced data marketers. Others may be running businesses where you're just venturing into the world of digital media and digital technology. I hope that I can kind of span both needs. So what we're going to talk about in terms of the world of customer engagement is the idea, first of all, that acquiring and enriching customer data is an incredibly important thing today in a modern retail business. I'm then going to go on and talk about how once you have that data, applying an analytics-driven approach to engaging with your customers is really the path if you want to take your business forward and drive relevance for your brand at scale. And lastly, then move on to how to use that analytics-driven approach to actually get measurable responses that drive loyalty, that drive frequency. I apologize, I've just recovered from a chest cold, so I'm a little hoarse today. So I hope that my presentation keeps you engaged for the little bit of time that we have together. So let's maybe just touch on the, if you like, the 30-second TVC for Sprooki. So as an organization, we're a technology company. We have a suite of software that sits in the cloud. We work with major retailers and shopping malls and consumer brands across the consumer Pacific region, the Asia Pacific region, excuse my faux pas. And we're really an organization that's about helping those retailers and those malls to drive commerce in more intelligent, more relevant, and really more mobile first ways. We particularly use the phrase driving commerce and don't refer to e-commerce or m-commerce, even though a lot of what we do is all around digital technology and internet and apps and mobile, because at the end of the day, what our customers are looking for is ways of bringing customers into stores and to make payments and to buy things and to move inventory. So from our perspective, even though we're a digital media, internet technology company, if a customer rocks up to the store at the end of the day and pays at the cash register, we've driven the outcome that our customer is looking for. We work as an enterprise software company at the top of the organization, and it's then the software ends up being used in things like apps and mobile websites and used to distribute content to social media sites and in-store displays. We work with a network of large clients across markets as diverse as Singapore, Vietnam, where we've recently entered, the Philippines. We're just in the process of implementing our first deployments in Indonesia. We're in markets like Australia and Hong Kong, so we're all over the Asia Pacific region. Enough on us. Let's talk about what it is that our clients are seeing. And the first issue to really touch on is to talk about the importance of customer data. And I want to do that in a way that kind of, I guess, brings it to life in a very practical way. So let me present you with an image of a shopping mall and a consumer who's standing there, and her name is Fiona. And you look at the traditional world of retail, and particularly the old media world of retail, that even as recently as maybe only 10 years ago, that your knowledge as a marketer, as somebody responsible for driving retail turnover in a store or a mall, your knowledge of what that particular consumer is doing today, how often she's visited the store, what her purchase habits and preferences are, was very limited. But we live in a world now where, if I show you two sets of data, first, the stuff that might be living in a loyalty program. So we know what her name is, we know the frequency of purchases, the categories of preference, how much she spends. And a lot of CRM programs and analytical programs will reveal information like that and will help you collect and accumulate very large data sets with information like that. But the question is, how do you engage with Fiona here and now when you overlay another data set, which is, we know that she's just walked up into the mall from the subway station. It's the third visit this week, and right now she's 10 yards from the store entrance. So if you're the marketer that's responsible for engaging with customers, you're the store operations manager that's got to deliver sales, the question for you becomes, what's the right piece of communication to put in front of that consumer right now with everything we know about her? Because the technology that we deliver today allows for two things. One, it allows us to accumulate that information, that data, so we know who it is and a little bit of what's happening. We kind of know the where, the when, the who, and the what. So it really comes down to what's the right message or what's the right piece of communication to put in front of her right now. What we see with our customers is that when they get to this point, this kind of light bulb goes on. It's like, yeah, you know, we've got so many different things happening in our stores in terms of product launches and promotions and upcoming events. We've got this wide range of marketing activity, store campaigns. They're all marketing mechanics that we could put in front of her, and the real task is to decide which is the right one to engage with her today. So what the technology will do now is, first of all, provide the ability to collect and enhance that information, and then secondly, provides a algorithmic or computer-driven approach to working through all of that information and making a determination, a prediction on what is the right campaign to put in front of her. And then lastly, via the means of things like apps and mobile websites and social media connections, gives you the ability to actually put that content right in front of her right now where she is, 10 yards from the store, with a mechanism to respond so that it might incentivize her or grab her attention and get her to actually come to the store. So what we're seeing a lot of is marketers struggling with this growing both opportunity and threat of e-commerce and the online world, and the reality that with e-commerce potentially representing 10 or 20% of sales, that still means that 80 or 90% of sales are occurring in store. So I want to use this fairly simple 2x2 grid, revealing a little bit of a management consulting background there to kind of help you understand how the technology helps bridge the divide between the online and the offline worlds. So on the bottom axis, you've got us looking at the online and offline worlds from the perspective of being a communications media. So you've got all these different ways of connecting and communicating with people, from down the right-hand end in terms of traditional media, all of the traditional marketers' favourites, broadcast TV, outdoor, etc., right through on the left-hand side to what is really working today, which is mobile, messenger services, Google, Facebook, websites. That is the digital environment for communicating today. And on this left-hand side, conversely, we're thinking about online and offline from a transactional or channel perspective. Where are they actually making purchase decisions, placing orders, making payments? And again, you've got, the spectrum from, being in store and standing at a counter and paying with a credit card through a point of sale system, right through to having an app in their hand on their mobile device and making a purchase. So what we've seen a lot of customers go through is this evolution where this world has been divided into two parts, the online part and the offline part, where this notion of communications versus channel are really bifurcated. So you've got either this, down in that left-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner, really, a lot of companies, particularly the e-commerce pure play companies, the Amazons of the world, that have used online marketing extremely well. So, the customer found the pair of shoes on the shoe site via Google, placed their order through the website or through the app, and then had the product delivered. So there was no offline connection whatsoever. And then up in the right-hand corner, the converse, the very traditional model, I saw an ad on TV, I visited a store, I paid, I got the goods type stuff. And that's been the world, but the reality of the world we live in today is more like this. And it's one where this neat 2x2 grid that I've just outlined for you as a conceptual model in practical terms, it's really hard to actually see it as a 2x2 grid. It's all merged together because the purchase journey of a typical consumer today might very well be something like this, where they've first had that awareness or stimulation about a product via something they've seen on social media. They've seen a friend's comment. And then maybe they've visited a store, or they've looked at a catalogue, or they've seen something else, but maybe they didn't buy. And then they've gone back to online to do some more research and ponder it. And then they were near a store and they got alerted to some sort of special or offer via their mobile device because there was a proximity marketing element to it, which we'll talk about a little later on in terms of some of the stuff that Sprooki does. And that really helped inform their purchase decision. And then subsequent to that, they bought and they received their product. And that is kind of the modern consumer journey for a vast bulk of consumers, and certainly a growing bulk of consumers. The data collection, the customer engagement model that we're talking to you about today addresses this issue head on, because the consumer journey is one that will move between the physical environment, where you may have things like beacon technology, which is what we use today in many cases along with Wi-Fi technology to detect presence. So things like in that previous slide with the consumer named Fiona, where we know that she's in a store or near a store right now, that's being detected by a beacon. So that's all digital, that's all online stuff, but nonetheless it is an offline journey. But we want to come back and interact with her in an online way because the mobile is the most powerful and most obvious way to connect with her. So my proposition to you in this section is that if you're a retail organization that wants to bridge this divide between the online and the offline worlds, an analytics-driven approach where you're gathering data and interacting with consumers across the online and offline environment is truly the only way that you're going to grow your business and stay relevant in the future. So let's now take a deeper approach or a deeper look into this whole idea of analytics. And again, I want to, having set that up, move back to a more practical thing and the idea of context. This is a quote from a book that was published in the last 12, 18 months by Forrester, a book called The Mobile Mind Shift. I've got some details at the end of the webinar about the book. And this book talks all about how the reality of the mobile device in a consumer's hands is it overlays a layer of understanding context, because not only do we know all that, if you like, abstract information about a name and a purchase history and a demographic profile, but now we're going to overlay a time and a place, which informs so much more about what they may be interested in their purchase journey, and therefore how you should tailor your marketing communications to target in a relevant way for that consumer. Wherever I am, you're available to me. Whenever I choose, your service is ready. And whatever my next steps, you've anticipated it. You know what I might want. You don't know exactly what I want, but you know what I might want. And whatever my action, you're ready to serve. These are, if you like, the contextual parameters of an engagement model for consumers today. I want to just touch on mobile for a moment. We find now that depending on who we're talking to, whether it's in an Asian market or a Western market, that you'll get varying degrees of understanding about mobile. There can be no doubt that one of the attributes of the Asia Pacific region is that it's really been a mobile first environment. You've got a generation, and I'm talking about hundreds of millions of consumers across the Asia Pacific markets that have not grown up with the desktop internet. Their experience of the internet is first and foremost through a mobile device, a smartphone or a tablet. Whereas we find when we talk to people in North America, Western type markets like Australia, in Europe, there's still a lot of focus on the web and perhaps not quite the understanding of how fast consumers are moving towards this device in their hand being the primary means of conducting research and making purchase decisions. So there's a little bit of research here which I've plucked from a very recent report published in the last month, in fact, by PricewaterhouseCoopers, by PwC. This is taken from their total retail survey, which they do on a regular basis. It collects data from some 23,000 survey participants right around the world. And I'm not going to drill down into the particular numbers other than to say there are unequivocal evidence that the role of the mobile device, and whether that's an app or a social media site, but it's the fact that it's in my hand as a key tool for influencing purchases, not just the actual commerce transaction. And you might recall I talked earlier about this notion of commerce, and we don't care whether the payment comes through the phone or through the point of sale system. We just care at Sprooki about the commerce actually happening. What we're seeing here is that there is this massive growth in direct transactions, in mobile commerce, in payments going through devices, but there's a much broader impact than that happening in the area of what is now being referred to simply as mobile influence. And as you see with this chart on the left, there's a whole range of activities, be it comparing prices or doing research or downloading a coupon or checking reviews. There's a whole range of things that consumers now do as part of their active gathering of data to make their purchase decision. So we've got some context, kind of explained a little bit about why mobile is important, but let's come back to this issue of collecting, enriching data, and then using it in a sensible way. So the key thing here is that we talk today very much about connected shoppers, about, again, this mobile element, but you've got consumers now that as a consequence of these devices, we know so much more about their behaviour and their habits. And here you've got an example from a Sprooki client, in this case a big shopping mall in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. and here's what they know about a consumer, which in this case we've anonymized some of the data. It's not a real person, but we know a lot of the purchase behavior, and it's that approach which allows us to differentiate between 14 different campaigns that could be relevant right now, or 100 campaigns, or only 3, which is the one that is most going to engage her. How does that actually work? Let's move on to the third part, which is driving measurable response and actually increasing loyalty and frequency. How is this used? Well, let's again build an example to show you. Here's a map of a location. In this particular case, it's actually a little slice of Singapore and a particular shopping mall there. A couple of rings, and they are geofences. So in this case, we're talking about how location-based marketing or proximity marketing adds a whole layer of relevance and even impulse to the purchase decision. Those geofences are magical, invisible boundaries that allow us to detect when a customer is within a particular distance. That might be anything from 100 yards to 500 yards to a mile away in an outdoor context. And that, based on what we know, and again, as you saw earlier, the where, the when, the who and the what, we can then serve up a highly relevant piece of content, and that content could be an alert about an event. In this particular case, it's about a short-term, limited time exclusive offer. In this case, for this particular consumer, it's a hairdressing service, so it's a discount. And if we've done our job, if the technology has delivered on its promise, that consumer is going to go, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. I like that. I do need to get my hair done. And they'll click on that notification. It'll take them into that mall's app or that retailer's app, and in this particular case it's a voucher that they can download, they can share it with their friends. So we find the integration of the retailer brand with social media is incredibly important now, because if that's something that a consumer might want to share, then we've made it easy for them. So they can share that with their friends and say, hey, why don't we go and get our hair done tonight and then have dinner. And in this particular case, it's a coupon or a voucher where they're going to pay at the point of sale. So that's an example of the type of mechanism where the consumer response to that is significantly higher than the typical response rates that you see to the kind of more recently traditional email marketing and even things like what used to be called banner ads. That's an outdoor context, but of course this also works very well in the indoor environment, and we've already found out a bit about Fiona, but in this case I touched on earlier this notion that inside the store, in-store, near-store, there's a whole world opening up. This beacon technology, iBeacon, is the Apple version of it. The underlying technology is referred to as Bluetooth low energy technology. And that allows for these little sensors to just transmit a signal. They themselves aren't doing any tracking. There's no big brother thing. The beacon in many ways is like a lighthouse on the shore or the cliff overlooking the sea. All it does is sit there and send an invisible signal that says, I am beacon number 12345 and I am here. And that's picked up by the phone and then the software underneath it. In this case, perhaps the Sprooki software is able to then say, well, that means that I am 10 yards from the store entrance right now. So there are some examples of how proximity overlays this much richer, potentially, experience for the consumer. And what does that translate to in terms of the sorts of outcomes that retailers are seeing? In this case, we've got a major shoe retailer, and just a snapshot from some campaigns that were run over a 3-week period. This particular outlet is in Manila in the Philippines, and you can see with some of these numbers, 69% sales conversion. I mean, some really, really dramatically good numbers that anybody in a general management or chief executive role is going to be saying, hey, how are we getting such good results? 24% response rate to a message that flashes out that, hey, there's a sale on right now. These are the sorts of measurable outcomes that drive retail sales, that drive loyalty, that we're seeing through the use of this technology. So to wind us towards a conclusion from this this set part where I'm talking at you, let's just touch on what we're hearing from the retailers and the brands in terms of the benefits that they're seeing. And there's a range there, but I really want to focus on just a couple of things. First of all, that first one, engaging mobile shoppers in context based on who they are and when and where they are shopping. That is what consumers want today. If you download this PwC report that I looked at earlier, it's got some really interesting insights into consumer behaviour. Then there's a heap of research out there on how consumer behaviour is changing so rapidly. But the shopping experience that consumers want today is one where it's interesting and it's relevant and it's engaging for them. And the second point is really around driving footfall. We do hear a lot about the growth of e-commerce, but it's by taking this wonderful digital technology, this predictive algorithms and predictive recommendations that our software is able to deliver, and turn it around away from e-commerce to driving footfall. And today we're seeing, again, borne out by the research, footfall is really around increasing it in raw numbers, but also increasing conversion. In many cases, we do hear still from many large clients that say, I've got a department store that's right next to the busiest train station in the city, so I've got no problem with the number of people, but I want to convert more people. So we're finding that key benefits are really around engaging shoppers and driving footfall that drives better sales conversion. So to wind us back to a conclusion and where we started, why customer data is so important. People are mobile now, and they're going to be even more connected in years to come. We're seeing a cycle of hardware and software upgrades that mean that consumers continue to find the technology getting cheaper and better. And as a consequence of having this power in their hands, the power of the internet in their hands, they expect more from brands. They want more, they demand more, and with this type of technology you can deliver more. And in the retail environment where consumer choice has never been wider or deeper in every category, we believe that an analytics-driven approach to customer engagement is going to deliver better outcomes for you. So with that long ramble now done, I'll pause for breath and ask or invite you to ask questions, and would be delighted to take questions on board and provide answers now. And indeed, if any of you want more detailed discussion, very happy to engage with you and come and talk to you about your situation and how we can guide you on it.
Great, Michael. That was incredibly helpful. So I think that the holy grail is always to make data and insights actionable, but it's always easier said than done. What tips do you have for retailers and developers to kind of, as they take baby steps, kind of get from 1 to 2 as opposed to 1 to 10?
Really good question. Thanks, Deborah. It really begins with baby steps, and what we find with the customers that are getting the best results is they don't try and eat the whole elephant in one go. They take it at a bite at a time. So find a starting point. That might be if you're a retailer with multiple stores, you might just take one store and start doing some trials there. You might start to engage with developers or with organizations like Sprooki to develop a business case and look at the results, look at the case studies, the sort of information we can show you as we have today, but there's a whole range of other stuff that we could share with you. Look at what other people are doing and decide on perhaps a pilot study, something that gets you going. And really, I can't stress more highly the idea that take a small step and do a trial, learn from it, and improve. And really to bring that light, I was talking to the marketing director of a fairly large mall group that we do business with, and they've been using the technology for a couple of years now, and that they've got many consumers. I can't even talk to the number, but they're using their apps and their mobile websites. But he was looking at the range of campaigns, and so they've looked at a campaign in their mall could be everything from a cafe running an end-of-day free muffin with coffee offer for the last 2 hours because the cafe manager wants to get rid of his last tray of muffins. And there's a campaign that could be sent out and you can get an immediate response, right through to a major brand having a season-long calendar of events. So what he was saying was, we've now got literally a couple of hundred campaigns in the system. So the range of things that we could put in front of a consumer is now mind-boggling. And traditionally we wouldn't see it that way because you'd walk around the mall and you'd see these hundreds of the campaigns in the windows of all the stores, but there was no way to really amass them and then sort through them and work out which is the right one to put in front of consumers. So there's an organisation that's grown from having a single app running just a few limited campaigns now with hundreds of thousands of users using their app, and many hundreds of campaigns being targeted one by one.
And then in terms of size of retailer, if you think of, global retailer, a domestic retailer, if you have, just a niche retailer, who does this work the best for?
That's a really good question. So I think that there's a range of solutions that go from the very large end of town right down to the small end. I guess to a certain extent, a lot of this data-driven approach, there's a very clear demarcation line that we see with a lot of organisations, and that's around engaging with their own brand directly with consumers versus using the whole range of advertising and third-party services. So let me just explain that. So if I describe to you that whether it's Google or Facebook or Twitter or your local newspaper companies, local news site, right through to a group buying organisation, any of these, or an email marketing newsletter service, all of these are advertising services in one shape or another, where they are the ones that are engaging with the consumer, and they, if you like, own the data. And so in terms of owning data, what we're seeing is a lot of medium and larger organizations saying, I'm still going to use those organizations because they're really valuable for helping me acquire customers and in many ways stay in touch. But once I've won a customer using one of those services, I want to thereafter engage directly with them via my own branded app or website or social media interaction. And so from that point of view, the medium to larger organisation that perhaps has got the marketing budget and the IT budget to be able to fund their own apps and CRM programs and loyalty programs and websites is going to be better positioned. But having said that, even if I was running Mike's Cafe, there would be things I could do in this space around using some of these advertising services to acquire data on my customers and use that to better serve them. So I think there are solutions that span the whole range. I mean, particularly in Sprooki's case, we're an enterprise solution, so we tend to work with organisations that are reasonably large, and by that I mean it might be, if it's a distributed retail network that's got lots of stores, they've probably got at least 50 to 100 stores, and we have some customers that have got thousands of stores.
Okay, so the questions are pouring in. So if mobile is a research device, do shoppers want active communications from brands and retailers? Where is the balance to be struck on mobile between it being a tool for consumers to research with the consumer doing the work and retailers and brands actively sending communications to consumers mobile?
Okay. So there's a couple of ways of answering this, and the first one that I would say is that one of the problems that I know I have, and I'm sure many of you also have, is that what were once the few selected email newsletters that I subscribe to seems to have become an enormous torrent of email newsletters, and kind of email is a bit broken for me. And it's hard to sort through that, and it feels like spam. So there is very clearly in the consumer's experience this boundary that is, in the consumer's language, if you communicate with me and give me stuff that's relevant to me and interesting to me, I'll continue to receive it from you, provided it's not too often. If for a brief moment it feels like spam, I'll probably delete your app. Now, some consumers actually would explicitly say that to you. Others will think it but not be able to articulate it. But what we find, as an example, with the predictive recommendation engine is that we've got a whole bunch of rules set up that limit the frequency of messaging. And to put that into practice, I mentioned earlier this mall that we're working with in Vietnam, and we've just done recently an installation there of 139 beacons around that. So literally every store and every major entrance and hallway in that mall has a beacon. So in theory, a consumer could walk through that and be spammed 139 times. Now, that's clearly not a good consumer experience and something you should never do. But the actual balance of, is it one really good message per day, or will they tolerate several a week, or do they want hello and goodbye messages? That's really, we can provide guidance. I would hesitate to give you too many hard and fast rules, but that's really about the learning and the looking at the data, looking at the results, and understanding what the consumer reaction is. And consumers will, if you're sending them too much, if you're sending them untargeted stuff, they'll tell you pretty quickly. And just to finish that, this is one of the major shifts that we're seeing is away from SMS, text message marketing, where that's been hugely popular with marketers for many years across Asia, and you've got a whole range of different legal environments in terms of privacy regulation. So in some markets that we work in, you could literally spam people all day and there's no overseeing regulatory body. And that's just dying because that's not what consumers want. So to come back to a short answer, you will learn the answer to that by working with your consumers and looking at their data. We generally find that fewer messages, well targeted, encourage consumers and get better results.
Okay, very helpful. And then, does or should using mobile to communicate to shoppers actually change retailer strategies, or is it more of a marketing add-on?
Okay. So I think probably best way that I could answer that is with a practical example that I recall we had a customer come on board some time back. And the brief that we got from them came through marketing, but it was really driven by their store ops people. And the brief was, we've used group buying, and they've used the couple of big brands that have been very popular in the last few years in the group buying space, the Groupons and the Living Socials. And they said, we really like that model because we know it works. If you've got a limited time exclusive offer, it will just drive people into the store. So as a tactical activity to be done on a infrequent basis, it's really powerful. And we want to do that, but we want to do it under our brand. We want to acquire the data. We want to own and understand the customer behavior. And so that was really, if you like, a store ops, really bottom line driven. When we looked at the typical retail seasonal cycle of, particularly around, fashion, apparel, footwear, get it in first of the season, full price, promote the range, some tactical discounts mid-season to stimulate activity, and then quit stock at the end of the season to make room for the next season. Now, I'm simplifying that, but that's kind of the cycle that we hear often from big retailers. This is the stuff that I'm talking about is really not a marketing add-on. It is a sales machine. It drives very clear outcomes very quickly.
Right. And then should we think about customer in terms of segments and what they have in common, or more broadly as a whole?
We see the best results from well-targeted campaigns that look at discrete groups of consumers. So I think the answer here is yes, there is sometimes still a place for the blast out where you want to reach everybody with a very strong single-minded message. But in more cases these days, what we're seeing is segments breaking away from the traditional simplistic demographic profiling, and that's by all means still used. And you could talk about in traditional media buying ways, about reach and frequency. We're really seeing psychographic profiling. We're seeing behavior-based profiling. So what does that mean? It means here's a campaign that I want to send to everybody that has not been active in the last 30 days to try and reactivate them. Here's another campaign that is broadly targeted at women aged 18 to 29 because it's a fast fashion offer of some description, but subset of that being those that we know have a preference for sportswear rather than elegant wear, so to speak. So I think the era of thinking about consumers just as a homogenous mass is well and truly dead. You need to think about the segments that drive your business, and those segments need to be sliced and diced across many different attributes now.
Okay, great. And I think we've got one more question. How are consumers in APAC who are mobile natives behaving differently than their Western counterparts who went through the desktop phase?
So I have observed a couple of discrete parts of consumer behavior, and probably the first of those has been the willingness to transact through a mobile device in much the same way that 15, 20 years ago in the early days of .com V1 and the web, people would ask, is it safe to buy something online? And then people eventually worked out that yes, it is generally safe to buy it. What we see with the more mature Western type markets in many cases is that same sort of question where people might now have shifted it instead of is it safe to buy online to is it safe to buy through mobile? And we see much less of that behavior in Asia. And when you look at e-commerce, in particularly some of the very big markets with big populations like Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, where credit card penetration may not be that high, but there's all sorts of alternative systems for payment, like debit cards and prepaid cards and things like this. And consumers have been very willing to adopt mobile payments or transacting through the mobile device. The second part has been, and it probably goes to a level of cultural difference. very much more, here and now. I'm in a mall. I want to use this combination of social media and the mobile to find my friends and have a shopping experience together. When you look at some of the stats from the major social networks, some of their highest penetration rates and usage rates are, again, in the big Asian markets. So the population there loves to use this combination of social media and the mobile device as the primary research tool. So that's a kind of an interesting thing that we see.
Okay, I think we've got one more, and it's a long one, and then I think we'll conclude. So, as you mentioned, there is clearly a mobile monetization gap in terms of consumers spending much more time browsing and searching products on their phones rather than purchasing. How do you see this changing in the future? And do you think connecting with consumers via social media rather than through beacons could be an in-store option? Via Snapchat and WeChat, for example, go where the consumers are rather than to interject sales. What are your thoughts?
Okay. So yeah, now looking forward, that's thank you for giving me the opportunity to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing. So there is no doubt in my mind that social media is going through a massive evolution, and that evolution ranges from things like reports of the Facebooks and the Googles of the world actually putting in their own beacon networks, right through to particularly what we see in Asia with messaging services messaging and social media platforms like WeChat actually having their own payment system. The key forecast that I would give you here is that the successful retailers of the future will adopt a model where they see the purchase process being these steps of, gathering research by the consumer, making a purchase decision, making a purchase, paying for it and receiving the goods or service, and recognizing that those things may all happen in different places at different times. So in terms of payments in particular, I think the successful retailers of the future will take friction out of the system. And if I'm a consumer in Hong Kong and I've been to the store and I bought a pair of shoes and I actually want to buy another pair of shoes, but I don't want to go back to the store, I just want to order them and I want to pay for them by WeChat or through WeChat, then you should let me do that. You should not force me, oh no, you've got to come back to the store, you've got to pay this way. So I think, the retail organization of the future will need to build this, if you like, this backbone of data and technology that allows them to understand where and when to influence the consumer and give them options around payment and delivery that suit the consumer's need.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. No, that's the insights you provided on this were absolutely unbelievable, and it seems like the consumer is ready and willing. I think the question is, where are the developers and the retailers on this?
Indeed, I think consumer willingness to adopt all this stuff and participate in a better shopping experience is there. I think you also have a whole generation of new smart technology companies, and of course that is a plug for Sprooki in particular, that are ready to help serve the major retailers across the world and hold their hand on this journey. It's not an easy thing, but I think there's ample evidence that consumers are still spending money, and it's a matter of adopting a marketing and technology approach that recognizes that the opportunity is still there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Michael, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Everyone will have a detailed note, and there will be a playback on the call if you missed anything. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you tune in to our future calls.
Thank you.